This is a New Jersey Network special report, Campaign 81, the gubernatorial debates. Good evening. I'm Larry Stoopnagle. This is the second debate between the candidates, Republican Thomas Kean and Democrat James Florio. Tonight's debate is sponsored by the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce. The moderator tonight is the Chamber's chairman of the board, Thomas Stanton.
All right, Mr. Kean will lead off our debate. Here is his opening statement of no more than 7 minutes. The Republican candidate for governor of New Jersey, Mr. Thomas H. Kean.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to take this opportunity immediately to thank you and the Chamber for giving us the opportunity for this, which is, after all, only the second debate which we've had. And I'm sorry to say it's the only debate at this point that we have scheduled the rest of this campaign. So this may also be, unfortunately, the last debate. More disturbing, considering that that is possible, that it would be the last debate, is the recent Eagleton poll, because that poll, if you read it correctly, showed that 50% of the electorate, fully 50% of the people, still aren't really aware of the candidates, aware of what they're saying, aware of who they are. And yet the choice those people make, the choice people make a little over a month from today, is going to be absolutely vital to their futures. Now, I've worked most of my adult life to improve things in this state. I believe my background, the kind of things I've done, uniquely qualifies me for the office that I'm running for, the governorship of this state. I've been an educator. I've taught at every level, most recently teaching graduate students at the State University. I've run my own business, and having run my own business, I have an understanding of what it's like out there in the private sector, and not just an understanding of government. Perhaps most importantly, though, I've served in government. I served in the legislature for 10 years, and I'm proud of the fact that during that time my colleagues had enough confidence in me to elect me to leadership time and time again, as minority leader, majority leader, speaker, and eventually even acting governor. I'm proud during that time that I was able to put so many laws in the books of this state. I point out this because background is important, this varied background, as an educator, as a businessman, as a legislator. All these things contribute, and all of those things have prepared me better for the office that I now seek. Things are far from well in this state, and they have been far from well for a long, long time. During the last 8 years, unemployment in this state has averaged 8.2%, well above the national average and even above the average for our region. New business startups, people who want to start new businesses, that's been down in this state by 58%. Incidents of violent crime, they've jumped 58%, and that now again is much greater than the region, as well as much greater than the nation. State taxes have gone up 124%. State budget's gone up by 179%. And during this period, during the Byrne years, New Jersey suffered the third greatest increase in per capita taxes of any state in the nation. It seems that New Jersey, and it seems that the answer of this administration and people to the kind of lingering recession which this state has been through is more taxes and more rules and more regulations. And it's no wonder, considering that businesses have left this state at a more and more rapid rate, so that few seem willing to stay here and take their place in a state. More and more they're moving not only to the Sun Belt, but to the states around us, to Delaware, Connecticut, other states in our own region. And what do we have now? We seem to have in this state a series, in addition to all these statistical problems, of unending crises, of a budget crisis almost every year, of an education crisis which shows test scores going the wrong way, not getting better but getting worse every year, of a water crisis, of a prison crisis, of even an insurance crisis. All these are things we're living with, and which we're experiencing in the state of New Jersey. We have a government that doesn't plan, it just reacts. And we have neither a governor nor a government of which we can be proud. Now, I've been traveling around the state, and as I've gone, I've done my best to try and give specific solutions attempts that I have to deal with these various problems. I've spelled out programs to deal with this troubled economy, which included unproductive taxes, cuts in those taxes, cuts in unnecessary rules and regulations, and a whole change in the attitude toward the private sector, the attitude that now exists in Trenton. I'd like to know tonight, I'd like to find something out. Jim, I hope you have some plans to revitalize the state's economy, and I hope that we'll hear about them tonight. I'd like to hear about those plans in detail, what they are, and how much they'll cost, and how many of the people in this room are going to be affected by those plans. And why is it? Why is it, when checking with with the United States Chamber of Commerce, that they stated that out of 7 out of every 10 votes that you've opposed initiatives to restore this country's economy? And what's your problem to solve New Jersey? What's your program to solve New Jersey's insurance needs? Our state has the worst automobile insurance mess in this country, affecting virtually every New Jersey adult. And the blame, as you know, must be placed squarely on the shoulders of this Byrne administration and the insurance commissioner, Jim Sheeran. Jim, you've made Jim Sheeran your deputy campaign manager. Does that mean your answer to our insurance problems are more Jim Sheeran? Or will you get rid of him? And what's your program for improving New Jersey education? As I've said, student test scores have declined, and our school teachers and administrators are overburdened with paperwork. We have an education commissioner who refuses to lead in areas such as teacher training, is insensitive to conflicts of interest right under his nose, and ranks second in this state as far as overseas junkets. One of my first acts as governor is going to be to replace him. Jim, are you going to keep him or are you going to replace him? And what about the income tax? I've heard you rule out a number of taxes, but I've never heard you rule out an increase in the income tax. Will you tell us tonight, in plain English, once and for all, will you rule out an increased or a graduated income tax in this state or not? I've answered all these questions, Jim, and now it's your turn. I hope this isn't the last debate we have. I hope we have at least 4 others. And I'm asking you tonight, really challenging you to agree with me tonight that we are going to accept at least 4 other debates in the north and south of this state. I want to improve this state. I'm tired of the jokes about Cancer Alley, political corruption, organized crime, and government by junket.
And now for his opening statement of no more than 7 minutes, may I present the Democratic candidate for governor of New Jersey, James J. Florio.
That's not on my time. Thank you very much, and good evening, all. I'm very pleased to be here not only as a gubernatorial candidate and a United States congressman, but also as the grandson of an immigrant, the son of a shipyard worker, a high school dropout who went into the Navy, who got his equivalency diploma in the Navy, went to Trenton State College on the GI Bill of Rights, the Korean War GI Bill of Rights, worked my way through Rutgers University for my law degree, with scholarships and some work, and then went on, as many of you know, to the state legislature. I make that point because New Jersey has been very good to me. And what I want to do as running for governor is to ensure that we have a New Jersey in the future that's going to provide opportunities to other people that I've had the opportunity to take advantage of. This is a good state. It's a good place to live. It's a good state to have business in. Tom keeps saying it's a basket case, it's a bad place. It's interesting. Just this week I read about Revlon expanding its facilities. I went through New Brunswick, and Johnson & Johnson is putting millions of dollars into the state. We've got research and development capabilities in this state that are second to none. Bell Laboratories being but one example. Today is a special day, you know. It's the first day of the fiscal year, and it happens to be the first day of a whole new relationship between the states and the federal government. The responsibilities that were the federal government's are now being given to the states. Unfortunately, the money isn't being given to the states. Next year, New Jersey will get, under the total program that's being advocated in Washington, $1.2 billion less to deal with the problems that are being given back to us. What we've obviously got to do to deal with this, and whatever we do, by the way, there will be hardship inflicted upon the people of this state as a result of these changes. But we've got to try to modify the situation so as to minimize that hardship. What we have to do is to try to expand our economy, and to raise the jobs and the levels and the revenue levels at the state level so that we can pick up the shortfall. We've got to try to do that with a partnership between the private sector and an efficient public sector presence in the state government. We need an active governor who will use his office to make the government work, to try to get the most for every tax dollar. Every wasted tax dollar means a dollar less to fix our roads or a dollar less to go and help our senior citizens. The governor's office, under a strong governor, must be the focal point for a systematic review of the whole government to uncover duplication and waste. To give you one example, the very fact that we currently have a tax collection system for the unemployment compensation system in one department, and then we have our regular tax collective system in another department for collection of other taxes from the same entities, is wasteful duplication. Consolidation right there can yield almost $1 million in savings. To create a business climate, it's going to take more than the simplistic mechanical formula that Tom is talking about in terms of cutting corporate taxes. It's going to take a total developmental strategy. And the plan that I've developed, and Tom hasn't heard it because we haven't been traveling in the same circles. I've been to the plant gates, I've been to the docks, I've been out talking to some people. And the plan is quite simply this. First, targeted tax cuts, which tie the tax benefits that are given from those tax cuts to investments in New Jersey, particularly in new and small businesses, which produce 80% of all new jobs. I want to exclude all new business investment from the net worth tax base. I want to permit banks tax reduction for any earnings they make from giving loans to new and small businesses. I want to give tax credits to industries that employ the disadvantaged and the hard to employ. Second, real regulatory reform that does not damage the environment, health, or worker safety. And I make no apologies for being concerned about those goals. But regulation that goes beyond those goals is wasteful and duplicative, and therefore should not be allowed to exist. A strong governor's office must systematically review all new regulations to avoid duplication, to assess the cost of any of those rules on the government, on business, and on individuals before those rules go into effect. The governor's office, if I'm the governor, should also direct the department by department cost-benefit analysis of all existing rules, and will do so. Third, we have to improve our transportation system. It is critical to the movement of goods and people in this state. It is imperative for New Jersey that we have an adequate transportation system for the economic development opportunities to take advantage of our location, which is one of our greatest assets. I propose a stable, dedicated fund to provide support for long-term improvements and operation of our transportation system. The revenues from the existing New Jersey gas tax should be used exclusively for transportation purposes. I'm also, incidentally, calling upon Washington to return to New Jersey 1 cent of the 4-cent federal gasoline tax that we send to Washington. We send $50 million more than we get back under that particular program. Getting that 1 penny will give us $40 to $45 million that can supplement the dedicated fund that I've talked about. Fourth, we need education for our young people for jobs of the future. Our educational system has to prepare our young people for the new skills that are going to be required in the high technology industry of the future. I will set a goal for our school system, that we have a school system which deals not only with the basics, but I would like to see at the end of Jim Florio's 4 years in office, the fact that every graduate of a high school has a basic familiarity with computer technology. Not to have that is to be, in a sense, irrelevant to industries of the future. Fifth, the use of new energy sources to keep our air and water clean. A clean environment need not cost jobs, and in fact can create jobs. New Jersey can no longer afford to dump its garbage in landfills. Sixth, we have to make our people safe. We have to deal with targeting in on those criminals who are the violent habitual offenders who cause us so many problems. Security and stability are important to people, and particularly important to business people. The Florio administration is not going to return to that day that we once had of fiscal instability, as the voodoo economics that's been described describes Tom's approach. I think those are the things we have to do. Efficient, sensitive
Thank you, Jim.
government.
We have to call it now. Now for their rebuttals. Now for their rebuttals with a time limit of 3 minutes each. First, Mr. Kean.
Well, as usual, Mr. Florio has given a lot of glittering generalities and no specifics. He is talking about targeted tax cuts. For who? For small business. Well, who is small business and how much, under what circumstances? How much is that going to cost the state government? That's not a program, that's a wish, that's an idea. You've got to flush that out and spell it out if you want to run for governor. You've got to do the kind of thing I've done, talking about, and you call my program voodoo economics. Let me tell you something, Jim. My program of getting rid of the net worth tax over 4 years, phasing down the corporate net income tax, is exactly the same program that's been proposed here and recommended by no lesser people in the governor's own Council of Economic Advisors. They're not exactly voodoo economics. And besides, when you talk about new business, when you talk about just doing away with the net worth tax for new business, what about the businesses here? What about the businesses that have sacrificed to stay here, particularly in some of our urban areas? What about some of those? Are they going to get no benefits? Are we going to do nothing to keep those jobs here? Are we going to say things to the people like the people who work at the Ford plant in Linden and so many of those older manufacturing plants? Are we going to say, hey, no benefits for you? We're not going to keep you here in the state. We care only about people who might come in new or go into the vague definition of small business? Got to spell that out. And when you talk about getting 1 cent back from Washington on a gasoline tax, that's a pipe dream. There isn't a person in Washington who would say that there's any chance of that happening. Not a chance of that happening. We've got to solve our problems here. We've got to do much more. Of course we want kids that are trained in computers. But I want kids first who are trained in reading and writing. I went to some different areas in New Brunswick than you did. I saw people who were trying to teach kids who came in their hands into the office with high school diplomas in their hand and couldn't read at the 3rd grade level, and therefore couldn't get jobs as night watchmen because they simply couldn't read the directions or couldn't read the safety warnings. This is the kind of things we've got to talk about. You talk about rules and regulations and eliminating them and efficiencies in government. I haven't seen anything in a legislative or congressional career that's indicated you've moved in that direction at all. I guess that means my time is up?
No, you got it.
30 seconds, okay. You have got to, we live off what we've done in the past. When Brendan Byrne was governor, he never had a budget in which I didn't propose at least $50 million for reductions and spell out what I thought those reductions could be. You voted year after year after year to increase the deficit in Washington, to increase spending in Trenton. You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. You have got to have a program. Okay.
Okay, and for his rebuttal, Mr. Florio.
Tom's tax proposal that he crows about so much has been described variously as voodoo economics, a riverboat gamble, and a blueprint for disaster, all by very prominent Republicans. The anticipated federal deficit, which is far in excess of what anyone thought it was going to be, and the high interest rates show that this kind of a plan at the national level is not working. And if it hasn't worked there, it certainly isn't going to work under the different conditions that we have in the state. On the state level, it hasn't worked either in the states in which it's been tried. Wisconsin, a similar plan plunged the state into fiscal chaos. And I would ask your staff people to look up for you what's happened in Minnesota. A $250 million surplus was turned into an $800 million deficit, with property taxes increasing by 20% because the cutback in revenues precluded the ability to provide assistance to the localities. That state's bond rating was lowered as a result of this supply-side type of economics at the state level. Tom's version of the supply-side mechanical formula, which looked so attractive early in the year when he perhaps thought he felt he needed it in the primary, would be a disaster for the state. It's a 3-year plan to cut $1 billion worth of corporate tax cuts, hoping that no programs need to be cut, hoping that each year we'll be able to balance the budget as is required by law, and hoping that we can just go forward without any pain whatsoever. It's naive at best. A 3-year billion-dollar tax giveaway is indefensible when you realize particularly that 1% of the companies of this state will receive 50% of the benefits of this plan. That is 1,800 companies out of a total of 180,000 companies will get half of this tax giveaway. There's no guarantee that any of this money will be invested in New Jersey. That's the difference between the targeted tax approach that I'm talking about and Tom's giveaway program. What's to stop the multinational from deciding to invest somewhere else? What's worse is that state government will have to reduce its help for counties, towns, and schools. Currently, 60% of our money that the state takes in goes to the counties, the municipalities, and the school districts. 60% of $1 billion over the next 3 years will be denied to those entities. And guess what? What that means is that the mayors and the council people and the school district people will have to make the decision. Do you cut the teachers? Do you cut the policemen? Or do you lift property taxes? That's really what this is about. A tax shift, and it's a tax shift ultimately to the property taxpayer. That's been the experience in all the places where this has been tried, and there's no reason to believe that it's not going to be the same here in New Jersey.
Now we come to the questions from our panel of news people. The first question will be posed by Ms. Perry Foster Pegg of the Trenton Times to Mr. Kean. Ms. Foster Pegg.
Mr. Kean, today is the first day of President Reagan's economic plan, which has served as a model for some of your tax proposals for New Jersey. But using your own figures, your plan to cut corporate taxes would give us a revenue loss of $384 million in the first year, and perhaps our biggest budget crisis in recent years. The state treasurer puts that figure even higher at close to $500 million. In your first year of office, when we have a budget estimated at about $6 billion, can you tell me how you would intend to balance it if there is a $400 to $500 million deficit? Where would we look for the revenues to make up for that initial corporate tax cut that you have proposed?
First of all, you're not using my figures. My figures, as presented in my programs, suggested it in a worst year scenario, using figures that were lower than the OMB estimates, so we would have a deficit in the area of around $100 million. That's a little different.
I differ.
But using my figures. And that's using a lower growth figure than I think there'll be. I don't think really that in a $6 billion budget I'm going to have that much problem finding the money. This is an attempt to make New Jersey competitive again, to make it competitive in the region and competitive in the country and keep the businesses we have and get new business for the state and pump some more money into this economy. Look, this administration, let me tell you some of the money that's around here. First of all, the Byrne administration for 8 straight years has underestimated income by figures on the average of $150 million. The least they ever underestimated income by was $75 million. So I assume it's reasonable to say, this year it was over $200 million. So I think it's reasonable to say that some of that money is around to be used. Secondly, I think we have to get into areas of waste and inefficiency. And many of those have been written up by your papers, among others. The $100 million that were disappeared or wasn't used because of waste and inefficiency in the Department of Labor and Industry, the $50 million that some of you wrote about in welfare overpayments, the Legislative Oversight Committee, which talked in June 1981 of $355 million wasted through duplication and inefficient management. I also would like, if I have time, to talk about what Governor Cahill did, setting up a management study commission which, through using private sector people, identified one-year savings and permanent savings over $100 million in 3 months by sending a commission in. That was a $1.6 billion budget. This is a budget over $6 billion. I think you can find a lot more.
Now, Linda Lamondola of the Star-Ledger to Mr. Florio.
Congressman Florio, this is a sensitive issue I'm going to bring up, but New Jersey has acquired a reputation across the nation, deserved or not, of being a state that's riddled by some corrupt politicians. Currently, we have 4 state senators. 2 are indicted, 2 are convicted on various criminal charges. We have other factors involved here. Would you pledge to the people tonight that if you are elected governor, you will work to change this unfortunate image of the state? And just how would you go about preventing official corruption in government so that we can restore integrity?
The obvious answer is yes, I pledge that, and that's an easy thing to do. I think much more significant is to show what one has done in the past. I have made a practice since coming into government every year, and I've asked Tom to do this, and it hasn't happened yet, to provide not only my net worth statement, but my income tax statements. I think disclosure is the essence of letting people know the sense of integrity that exists in government. And this is a sensitive response to your sensitive issue. I have tried always to conduct myself above and beyond any kind of question. I'm aware that there are ethnic stereotypes that exist in this country, unfortunate in many respects, and therefore maybe there's an extra burden on me and others such as myself to lean over backwards to make sure that they're above and beyond any question. The fact of the matter is I will continue the policy, which is now in existence at the state level, to require all high-ranking officials to make disclosure of their assets. I will scrutinize, for my cabinet positions, all of the applicants and all of the nominees, and there are no commitments, by the way, at this point, for anyone. There will be a new administration, and anyone that's coming into it will be scrutinized very closely to ensure that they meet my high standards that I have set in my whole career. I come from a Republican district and win with 80% majorities. I like to think that that means that I stand for something that even Republicans and Democrats and independents can stand for, and a hard part of that, a very important part of that, is integrity.
Next, Frank Prendergast of the Atlantic City Press to Mr. Kean.
Yeah, Mr. Kean, there were 29,633 people employed in the casino industry in August. Now the summer season is over. Some of the casinos have started to lay off. There's been about 600 laid off so far. There are estimates that it could go from 1,500 even up to 5,000 layoffs. 24-hour gambling is viewed by some as a means to help prevent the layoffs, although no casino has yet said they'd stay open 24 hours. As governor, would you favor or be opposed to 24-hour gambling, and why?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that that's the answer to layoffs. I think the answer to layoffs is if there are rules and regulations affecting casino gambling that have nothing to do with keeping it honest, with keeping people who should not be involved in gambling out of the system, if there are rules and regulations that are simply hampering the operations of those gambling houses, then those are the ones we should look at to see if we can't help out in that way. But as far as 24-hour gambling, I don't know if that's a magic answer to anything. I would want to see the figures. I'd want to talk to members of my Casino Control Commission, and I'd want to find out if, in truth, that was economically that important for the industry and what that would mean to the city and the people who work there. And I believe I'd live very much by the recommendations of that Casino Control Commission.
And now, William Sherman of WHWH Radio in Princeton to Mr. Florio.
Mr. Congressman, during the last debate, you were asked a question about the striking air controllers, and you said you thought the president was right in his action, but thought it should be modified later. Then you got some heat from CWA, who said they were thinking about rescinding their endorsement, and then you kind of changed your position. Would you fire striking state employees if they walked?
Let me just clarify your assumption. I haven't changed my position whatsoever on the merits of the particular question that was asked to me with regard to the PATCO situation. And the question I've always responded to with the same answer is that I do not support the right to strike for public employees, and that I have not and will not say what it is I'm going to do when and if a work stoppage occurs. My criticism of the president and the PATCO people was that in the process of collective bargaining, one does not come to ultimately a conclusion by drawing lines in the sand and doing juvenile things like stating what you're going to do. Flexibility is the key to arriving at collective bargaining situations. The fact is the law must be enforced, and therefore one has to, and the law requires the public employer to go forward with a good faith effort to provide equity to the employees. So what I'm saying is that the law will be enforced, that there is not necessarily jail terms that are required for work stoppages in New Jersey. There may very well be other sanctions. But I think the key thing we have to have in these next number of years when there's going to be a hard amount of difficulty in trying to resolve public employees' claims for equity. I was astounded to learn that a college professor, a full PhD professor, starts in our state college system at $18,000. So there's some claims that are out there that are legitimately have to be dealt with. But I think the key point I want to make is that I do not support the right to strike for public employees, have never done it and don't today, notwithstanding the support that I've received from some of the trade unions. And the fact of the matter is I will enforce that law, but I'm not going to tell anybody how I'm going to enforce it in terms of the sanctions that one comes up with if, in fact, work stoppages occurs.
Alternating the candidates now, Perry Foster Pegg to Mr. Florio.
Congressman Florio, assuming the traditional growth rates, next year's state budget is expected to be over $6 billion, and the state is going to have a hard time finding the tax revenues to fund it. You've said if you were faced with this problem, you'd oppose increasing property taxes or the sales tax. However, you have mentioned changing the income tax to make it progressive, meaning those who earn more would have to pay more than those who earn less. If you were elected and faced a budget shortfall, would you support a progressive income tax, and how would you change it to make it progressive?
Tom said all those things about what I said. I didn't say at the last debate any of those things. What I said is that my responsibility is to make up the federal shortfall to the state government, which as of today, unless it's changed, is about $33 million. I think I can do that without the need for any additional taxes. We've got a budget surplus of about $22 million. I gave you one little example before that can save $1 million in terms of consolidation. There are other things that can be done to make up the shortfall in the state government. What we should not do is do what Tom wants to do, which is to cut revenues by bigger chunks of money so that we have an even bigger gap. My point is, and I have made this very directly, the problem to this state from the shortfalls at the federal government are going to be at the local level and the municipal level and the school district level. Am I prepared to say that I, as governor, will be willing to have the state government step in and take the responsibilities for everything that the federal government is walking away from, almost $1 billion? The answer is no. I'm prepared to try to assist the municipalities, try to assist the school districts in effectuating some economies, being all kinds of assistance to them. But I would be less than candid if I said tonight that the state of New Jersey, under Governor Florio, is going to be prepared to raise almost $1 billion to give to the counties, the cities, and the school districts the money to make up the shortfall that's coming from the federal government cutting back. Incidentally, the newest proposal, and I hope the mayors that are watching out there know that there's a 12% cutback planned in revenue sharing, which is going to cause great grief at that level.
Linda Lamandola to Mr. Kean.
Mr. Kean, today's a happy day for more than 3 million New Jerseyans. They'll be having a few more dollars in their paychecks next week under President Reagan's personal tax cuts. However, for about 9,300 families in New Jersey, it's a sad day. They'll be losing all welfare benefits. How will you face a welfare mother, a mother who's been a member of the working poor, trying to earn a living to support her children, and depending on welfare assistance to supplement her income? How will you tell her that no longer will her children be able to afford to get medical care?
What we're talking about, as you know, is a change in the eligibility levels. We're not talking about a reduction in all of welfare isn't suddenly disappearing. And many of those who are entitled to welfare, who are entitled to that safety net, they're going to continue to get it. How am I going to face it? I'm going to do what I can to mitigate any problems in this state. That's the job I'll have as governor. And I care very much about anybody who's in any kind of trouble, and to the limits of the state budget and limits of our ability, we'll try to do what we can for them. But one of the things we can do, which to me is very, very important, is deliver those services so much more efficiently than they've been delivered. To really save some money at that level, to try and do something for some of the people that you and I both care about. And you know, you've written about it, Linda, as much as anybody, the problems in that department. You've written about the overpayments, you've written about the scandals, basically, you've written about the money that's been wasted, and you've written about large amounts of money. Now, I don't know why we can't take some of that money, for instance, that overpayment in welfare and things like that, and use that much more effectively to help people, to get that money down to the level where it's going to do some good. You remember that, right? You wrote the story in that report about $355 million identified by the Musto Commission, which they said was largely wasted because of the bureaucracy and inefficiency of the State's Department of Human Services. So what we've got to do to get down to some of the people that you care about is get in some people who know how to manage, get in some people who can manage resources and manage dollars, because that's the only way we're going to deliver those services best and make use of every dollar for those people who need it so desperately.
All right, Frank Prendergast to Mr. Florio.
Yeah, Congressman, I'd like to have your view on 24-hour gambling also, adding that many police in the area think that traffic conditions would be better if casinos didn't close at 4 or 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, let me be specific. I am at this point inclined to say that it's something that should be done. I'm convinced, as I see some of the information coming, that traffic jams are a legitimate concern. The ability to go on different shifts will facilitate more job opportunities. So on balance, until persuaded otherwise, I'm inclined to think that it's a desirable thing. Having said that, let me say something about what Tom's last response was in terms of block grants and cutbacks. I have tried to explain very patiently, but Tom doesn't understand what it is that's happening at the state level in the terms of the monies coming back. Block grants and the welfare assistance and the assistance that's going to other people under these categorical programs are not an opportunity, as he talks about. We're taking a number of programs, we're consolidating them together, giving them to the state government, and if we had $100 worth of programs, we're saying, here they are in a block grant, here's $75, go perform the service in New Jersey. That's not an opportunity, except maybe an opportunity to preside over pain. I met last weekend with a state organization of parents who had retarded children. If Tom doesn't understand, they understand the problems that are associated with this allocation, which will compete and have those people compete with the maternal and the infant care people and the alcohol abuse people. This is not something that's good. This is almost sad what it is that's taking place. And we at the federal level have been dragooned as a result of some policies into going forward with these new policies, and the state will really pay a very serious price. The next year will be hard and cruel for a whole lot of people, whether it be senior citizens, handicapped people, people who least can afford to have problems visited upon them.
Okay. Bill Sherman to Mr. Kean.
Mr. Kean, state officials estimate there's going to be a $300 million hole in the upcoming budget. We're going to lose $1 billion in federal funds. Your tax package will reduce income by at least $100 million by your own figures. Would you be forced to cut the cities and counties adrift that are losing that $1 billion, who have a cap so they can't raise the local property tax rate to implement those programs? What's going to happen to them?
I'm not talking about cutting anybody adrift. You're talking about a one-year budget problem. I'm talking about a problem that's existed year after year after year. We've had a budget problem every year, and you remember it. And this administration has cut program after program over program. You mentioned slow learners or retarded or what have you. This administration has cut funds to all those groups because we have a recurring budget crisis. In spite of this tremendous tax increase, we have budget crisis after budget crisis after budget crisis. What I'm suggesting is the reason for that is a declining economy, an economy in this state that every single chart shows is going down, not up in the total. And that means that everybody has less money, including government. And that's what causes these crises. What I'm saying is, basically, look, we have got to make an investment. We had better make New Jersey competitive again. We better be competitive in the region and competitive in the country. Because if we're not going to be able to do anything except have these recurring crises in which government cannot do the kind of things you and I think it ought to. Now, I think there's a number of ways and a number of areas of government, identified some of them to a previous question, that we can identify and cut back on in order to make this investment for the state's future. This is the kind of things we have to do. I'm not talking about cutting back monies for cities or anything like that. I'm not talking about anything that's going to raise anybody's property taxes. I'm talking about a program that's going to bring in more, not less money for government. It's more, not less. That's the hope. And that's what we've got to do in this state if we're going to be competitive again.
Alternating the candidates once again, Perry Foster Pegg to Mr. Kean.
Mr. Kean, I was using your figures when I asked you my initial question. There is going to be a $400 million deficit in the budget. You get $100 million because you add on increases in other taxes that are expected, as in the state income tax. I believe in the first year of your program, before the initiative takes effect, we are going to have a budget gap of between $400 and $500 million. If that happens, I'm asking you, before your economic program might get going, as you envision it, what would you do if faced with this problem and with the problems coming from Washington?
You're talking very much also about a static economy, not an economy that's moving in any way at all. Now, if we have a purely static economy, if we have an economy that's going down instead of up, if we have an economy that's not generating any more revenue, then you can talk about those figures, but that's not the economy that anybody predicts. My own feeling is that we're going to have a good economy. My program is not over 1 year, it's over 4 years, and that we can accomplish that. I don't expect, you say, what will I do if there's a $500 million deficit? What will I do if there's a $1 billion deficit? I don't expect those things to happen.
What would you do?
If I have a $1 billion deficit?
Yeah.
I'll do it. Or a $2 billion deficit? I will do my best as governor to manage the funds as best I can to make it work, to do what I can for the government, to use those funds in the best way to benefit the majority of the people of this state. I think there are a number of savings we can make. I do believe taxes that can be cut. I do believe there are economies that we can make in government. I think this has been a particularly inefficient and wasteful administration, and I think we have to get into those areas, and I think we will get into those areas.
Linda Lamondello to Mr. Florio.
Mr. Florio, the American dream of many young couples is to own their own home, but in New Jersey that dream has turned into a nightmare. Do you have any plans on the drawing board that would spur construction in this state?
Yes, I do. I am proposing and have proposed publicly to create a department or a division of housing in the new Department of Commerce. I think that consolidation of all the different facets of housing into one agency will facilitate the problems that have been associated with regulatory lag, and of course that translates into money. I am prepared to propose legislation to allow the discretion on the part of the trustees of the various pension funds in our state to, on their own, if they decide to do so, allow their members to utilize those pension funds for mortgage monies, which will free up money from the mortgage market. The biggest problem we all know, of course, is interest rates at the federal level, and there's not too terribly much I can do about that. But housing is very important, not only in and of itself as an industry, but also an attracting industry to our state. We have to deal with that problem. Let me respond to a couple of points that have been made as well. I'm confused. I've heard that our economy is a basket case, and yet it is not going to be static enough so that we're going to have these revenues coming in the next year to pick up the shortfall. I must be missing something, because a basket case static economy is not going to generate revenues to help us pick up the shortfall. I've heard something said about how we have to compete in terms of tax benefits. If anybody in this audience thinks we're going to compete with Texas in the ability to give away revenues, they are extremely naive. We can't compete on that basis. We have to compete with what we have. Access to the major market, which means that we have to fix up our transportation system, a recreational industry and tourist industry that nobody else has, that has to be developed systematically, a productive workforce that can be made more productive, research and development capabilities that can be part of the high technology industries of the future. All of those things have to be marketed and emphasized. We can't put all of our eggs in the one basket of tax giveaways and realistically hope that we can attract people here when Texas has literally billions of dollars of oil revenues that they can give away to businesses.
Frank Prendergast to Mr. Kean.
Yeah, Mr. Kean, there's expected to be a public question on the ballot in November dealing with riparian rights. If the people approve it, it means that the state cannot claim riparian land if private owners have paid taxes on it for 40 years and it hasn't been covered by water. Now the state can go back to year 1664 to make claims. It can make the claim any time in the future. If the state makes a claim, the people who own the property have to pay the fair market value to buy it back again from the state. Now, critics of this say that that fund helps the school system. When you go to the ballot in November, when you go to the voting booth in November, how are you going to vote and why?
Well, first of all, I said that this was put on the ballot in response to a real need and in response to a state lack. There was supposed to be funding for the mapping of these lands. These mappings were supposed to be concluded 2 or 3 years ago. The result is they were done all the way up and down the coast, except in the area that you represent. And the problem is that there are small homeowners up and down the coast who don't really know whether or not they own the land or the state of New Jersey has a claim or what. The first thing to do is to get that mapping finished, as was promised 3 years ago. I understand the problem. I understand what's on the ballot. The problem to me is the school fund. I am having some research done right now, frankly, as to whether or not that school fund will be affected, as some of the school board members have told me, significantly by the passage of this amendment. If it's going to be affected very significantly, then I can't support it. I'll have to go on and just simply get that mapping done. But I want the answer to that question. I haven't gotten it yet.
Bill Sherman to Mr. Florio.
Congressman, we were asked to keep our questions kind of short if possible, but that doesn't seem to be working. So very, very specifically, New Jersey, this year's budget is $5.7 billion. New Jersey's income is $5.5 billion. That's a built-in shortfall. They used a couple of one-shot tax gimmicks to even balance this year's budget and surpluses. Your plan calls for tax cuts, targeted tax cuts, transportation improvements, cost money. How you going to fill the hole?
The points that I'm making are not holes. Targeted tax cut, and let me give you the example that I've used as I've talked to people. The woman who came to me and said, Congressman, I own a travel agency. I went to a bank to try to get a loan. The bank would not give me the loan because I'm a new business, I'm a small business, and the answer was no. I'm saying the targeted tax cut should be directed towards that bank, saying, bank, loan that woman that money, and you will not have to pay taxes on the interest that she will be paying you. The net loss to the Treasury will be far excelled by the fact that that woman now has expanded her travel agency. The town has a rateable because she may have put a wing on it. She wanted to buy a computer, incidentally. So hopefully somebody who makes computers is doing better because she bought that computer. She got the loan and hired 2 people if she gets the loan. One was a clerical person, one was a computer person. They are all paying money into the fund. So what I'm suggesting is targeted tax concepts don't have to result in net revenue losses. So that's the difference between Tom's approach and my approach. With regard to the transportation dedicated fund, what I'm saying is the problem in transportation over the years has not been, well, it has in part been the absence of sufficient monies, but more significantly has been the fact that there isn't the surety and the certainty and the stability for long-term planning, because no one can plan anything more than a year in advance, because you never know what the legislature is going to do in terms of voting for monies for transportation. I'm suggesting that you do is you allocate the gasoline tax and dedicate it exclusively for transportation purposes, so that we know over the next number of years it will be there, and we can start planning for the maintenance or the modification or the expansion. The stability is the key concept under the proposal I'm talking about, a dedication tax.
And now for their summations. Of no more than 3 minutes. First, Mr. Kean.
I'll say first of all that I'm sorry this debate was so short, because I think there was not as much light established as should have been on this particular debate. But let me say finally that this debate does represent a difference, and it does represent a clash between 2 opposing philosophies. As CBS television said in its endorsement of me yesterday, it offers voters a clear-cut difference between a campaign who focuses his campaign on improving the state's business climate, lifting government regulations, and trimming the bureaucracy, and a Democratic candidate who takes the traditional postures that government can solve all our problems. Now, Jim, you've held that philosophy ever since you first took office. I don't agree with it. I asked you tonight, and I started off my opening statement by asking you a number of questions. to specify, to talk about what your program was in detail. We didn't get that. I asked you in detail to say whether or not, and somebody else asked you here tonight, whether or not you would rule out or whether you would have a graduated income tax. You did not answer that question. I asked you some other questions about Fred Burke, about Jim Sheeran. You didn't answer those either. Sooner or later in this campaign, you're going to have to address yourself to those. We have very different philosophies and very different programs. I am running in support of a philosophy that believes you can cut government to some degree, that believes you can cut taxes to some degree, that believes that there is waste and there is inefficiency and better management can do something about these. I'm running against, absolutely against, the last 8 years of Brendan Byrne and his administration, and I've spelled out in detail exactly what I think is wrong with those years and what I would like to change. You are running on at least one statement that you are happy to run on the record of Brendan Byrne, and you will support much that's going on in those. I want to know what you'll support and what you won't support. I think, in other words, what we have to do is spell out in much greater detail the differences. Not just the fact you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, all sorts of words about where I came from or where you come from, or words about how you don't like Ronald Reagan or I do like Ronald Reagan. Both of us are going to be living with the Reagan administration for the next 3 years. One of us is going to be governor. I think I can deal with that administration. I think I can work with that administration. I think I can work with the president. I think I can work with members of his cabinet. I think I can work with the leaders of Congress to do what's best for New Jersey. To really, thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. And now for his summation, Mr. Florio.
Thank you very much. I think the people tonight will decide who was more specific in their responses. And I would just like to say I agree there is a philosophic difference between Tom and myself, that I believe that there is a need for effective, sensitive government to do things that have to be done in the public sector. Tom starts from the premise that government is bad, and I suppose it's logical, therefore, to follow from that premise to try to gut government, and then it can never do anything at all. I'm not convinced that that is the case. I think there's a need for sensitive government but efficient government, and that's what I am talking about. Reining in government so that it deals with the problems that have to be dealt with in a cost-effective way. Education, fighting crime, protecting the environment are all public responsibilities. As I indicated to you earlier, I attended college on the Korean GI Bill, a governmental program. I couldn't have completed my education without the state college system, the state university. You know, it's popular to talk about the system stifling all of us. And we all like to think of ourselves as self-made people. I'd like everybody to make a little mental inventory as to how they've been helped by the system through the course of their lives. I think it's important that we do that and stand back and make those types of decisions. I'm really, in a sense, the wrong person to say that the system has stifled people. My immigrant grandfather, if he were here today, would very be proud of the fact that the grandson of an immigrant is a United States congressman. My father, who was a shipyard worker, I know is proud of the fact that his son today is running for the office of governor. So don't tell me that the governmental system doesn't provide people with opportunities if they want to take advantage of those opportunities. What I'm suggesting to you is that I want to be the leader of a government that provides people the opportunity to rise or fall on the merits of their own particular capabilities. I'm convinced that I have the capability, I think I have the talents, and I'd appreciate your consideration.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. May I thank the candidates for their participation. May I also thank the panel, whose questions helped us to learn more about the candidates and their views. Our thanks also to our timekeeper. The portraits of the candidates on either side of the stage are the work of the noted New Jersey artist and cartoonist Bill Canfield. Representatives of the candidates may come forward after we adjourn and claim them for their own use. I'll take them home. No. To everyone, whether you be a Democrat, Republican, or Independent, remember that you have an obligation to vote on Election Day, November the 3rd. Thank everyone for coming, and have a safe journey home.
How are you doing?
Very good.
Campaign 81, the gubernatorial debates, has been a special presentation of the New Jersey Network.
Thank you.